Hello, survivors. Do you want to be part of the next stories? Comment below your name and the situation you would like to be in. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin. My property sits on 3 acres of wooded land, about 40 miles from Nashville. I'd spent 2 years building what I called my content creation facility. Really just a reinforced steel barn with enough firepower to make the ATF nervous and my neighbors feel safe. Underground storage, 2 years of MREs, and a private range where I could test anything short of artillery. Jared Valentine, my cameraman, was setting up the tripods while I prepped the M2. Beautiful piece of machinery, belt-fed, air-cooled, designed to punch through engine blocks at a mile. The kind of weapon that demanded respect and drew views. "Dude, your subscriber count hit 2.8 million overnight," Jared called out, adjusting the main camera angle. That Barrett review really took off. I was threading the ammunition belt through the feed mechanism, each 50 BMG cartridge the size of a small cigar. Wait until they see what this baby can do to that junk car we dragged out there. Jared had been with me for 6 months now. Fresh out of film school and eager to make his mark shooting gun content. Good kid, but soft around the edges. Never served. Never understood why I built my setup like a military checkpoint. He thought it was all for show. "You really think we need all this security stuff?" he'd asked once, gesturing at the motion sensors and reinforced walls. "Better to have it and not need it," I'd told him. Standard prepper wisdom that he laughed off, not laughing now. The emergency alert came at 7:52 a.m. That sharp, piercing tone that cuts through everything, followed by a robotic voice. "Emergency alert system. Seek immediate shelter. Avoid contact with aggressive individuals. This is not a test." Jared's phone buzzed with the same alert. We looked at each other, then at our phones, waiting for more information. Nothing came. "Probably just a test they forgot to label," Jared said, but his voice carried uncertainty. I was about to agree when I heard the first scream. It came from the ridge by my pond, maybe 200 yards northeast of our position. Not a human scream, at least not entirely human anymore. It started as a shriek of pain and dissolved into something between a growl and a wail. The kind of sound that makes every primitive part of your brain scream, "Run." "What the hell was that?" Jared whispered. His camera forgotten. I was already moving, muscle memory from my army days taking over. The M2 was loaded and ready, its bipod legs extended on the concrete firing platform I'd built specifically for this kind of setup. I swung the barrel toward the tree line, squinting through the morning mist. That's when I saw him. A man in orange coveralls stumbled out of the woods, maintenance uniform from the radio tower company that serviced the area. But something was terribly wrong. His left arm hung, and dark stains covered the front of his shirt. He moved with jerky spasms. "Jared, get behind the concrete barrier," I ordered, not taking my eyes off the approaching figure. "Is he hurt? Should we help him?" The man raised his head, and I got my first clear look at his face. His skin had turned a sickly yellow-gray, like old wax left in the sun. Burst blood vessels created a web of purple lines across his cheeks. But his eyes, Christ, his eyes were filmed over with milky cataracts, yet they locked onto us with ravenous intensity. "That's not a man anymore," I said quietly. The thing that used to be a maintenance worker opened its mouth and released another of those inhuman wails. Then it started running, not the shambling zombie walk from movies. This thing moved like a broken sprinter, covering ground with twitching, desperate strides. Its broken arm flopped wildly, but its legs churned with persistence, devouring the distance between us. I didn't hesitate. The M2 roared to life. The first burst took the infected center mass, 3 rounds of 50 BMG ammunition slamming into its torso. The impact should have dropped a bull elephant. The thing staggered, massive exit wounds erupting from its back but kept coming. Dark, viscous fluid sprayed from the holes instead of blood. "Holy shit!" Jared screamed behind me, his voice barely audible over the machine gun's thunder. I adjusted my aim higher. The next burst caught the infected in the head and neck, essentially removing both from its shoulders. The body collapsed in a twitching heap, finally still. But the sound of gunfire had attracted attention. They came out of the woods like a nightmare parade. More maintenance workers. A woman in scrubs whose once white uniform was now splattered with rust-colored stains. An elderly man in pajamas whose slack jaw hung open, revealing blackened teeth. All of them moving with that same convulsive urgency. All of them streaming toward the sound of my weapon like moths to flame. "Derek!" Jared's voice cracked with panic. "There's more coming from the road!" I spun the M2 toward the main access road and felt my blood freeze. At least 30 infected poured around the bend. A chaotic procession of what had been ordinary people just hours ago. Teachers, office workers, a guy still wearing a Titans jersey whose chest cavity gaped open like a second mouth. They moved as individuals but flowed like spilled mercury, all drawn to the same source, us. The machine gun spoke again, long bursts that sent brass casings ringing against the concrete. Each .50 caliber round punched through multiple targets, the devastating ballistics turning human bodies into crimson mist. But for every infected I dropped, 2 more seemed to take its place. "We need to get inside," I shouted over the weapon's roar. Now. The steel barn security system activated with the press of a button on my keychain. Heavy doors began sliding shut, but they moved slowly, 15 seconds to full closure, an eternity when death was sprinting toward you. I kept the M2 running, laying down suppressive fire while Jake bolted for the entrance. One infected, a teenage girl in a high school Letterman jacket, broke away from the main group and angled toward him. I swung the gun toward her, but Jake was directly in my line of fire. "Duck!" I screamed. Jake dropped and rolled as I opened up, the heavy rounds whistling inches over his head. The infected girl disintegrated in a spray of bone and tissue, but 2 more had already rounded the corner of my workshop building. 10 seconds until the doors closed. Jake scrambled through the narrowing gap while I grabbed the M2's tripod, dragging the entire weapon backward. The infected reached our position just as I tumbled through the entrance, the steel doors slamming shut with a final, resonating clang. Emergency lighting bathed the barn's interior in red. Along the walls, gun racks displayed my collection: AR-15s, AK variants, hunting rifles, shotguns, and enough ammunition to outfit a small army. A prepared position that had taken me years to build and stock. Jake sat on the floor, hyperventilating. "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?" "Zombies," I said simply, checking the M2's ammunition counter. I'd burned through nearly 200 rounds in under 3 minutes, and we just rang the dinner bell for every infected thing within 5 miles. Outside, the sound of impact echoed through the steel walls. Dozens of fists and bodies slamming against the barriers, accompanied by that chorus of inhuman wails. The barn shuddered with each collective blow, but the reinforced construction held. "This can't be real," Jake whispered, clutching his camera. "This can't be happening." I was already moving, conducting a mental inventory of our resources. Water tanks held 3 weeks' worth for 2 people. Food storage contained enough MREs and canned goods for months. Medical supplies, communications equipment, backup power generators. Everything a serious prepper needed for long-term survival. But ammunition was finite, and outside the crowd was growing larger. "Jake, I need you to focus," I said, pulling an AR-15 from its rack and checking the magazine. "You know how to shoot?" "My dad took me to a range once when I was 12. "Good enough. Basic rule. Aim for the head. Center mass doesn't stop them." I handed him the rifle and a tactical vest loaded with magazines. "Keep your finger off the trigger unless you're ready to kill something." The security monitors showed feeds from cameras positioned around my property. On screen after screen, infected wandered through my carefully maintained grounds. Some moved in loose groups, others alone. The mob at our door had grown to over 50 individuals, pressing against the steel. My motion sensors were going crazy, detecting movement from every direction. The main road, the forest paths, even the creek bed behind my shooting range. They were coming from everywhere, drawn by the sound of battle. "How many bullets do we have?" Jake asked, his voice steadier now. I did a quick calculation based on my storage system. Maybe 10,000 rounds of mixed caliber. Sounds like a lot, but I gestured at the monitors showing more infected arriving every minute. Math doesn't look good if they keep coming like this. The radio crackled to life. Emergency broadcast from Nashville reporting widespread chaos. Hospitals overrun, police stations abandoned, military units pulling back to established safe zones. The infection wasn't isolated to our area. It was everywhere. We need to make every shot count, I continued, switching to a semi-automatic configuration on my primary rifle. Full auto is for covering fire only. Controlled bursts, aimed shots. These things are fast, but not particularly smart. Jake nodded, shouldering his weapon with surprising competence. What's the plan? Right now, we hold this position. I built this place to withstand a siege, and that's exactly what we're going to give it. I checked the timestamp on the security system. 11:28 a.m. Been less than 4 hours since this started, and the whole world's gone to hell. On the monitors, I watched a new group emerge from the tree line. At least 100 infected, moving with coordination that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with shared hunger. They flowed around the barn like water, testing every possible entry point. "Derek," Jake's voice was barely a whisper. "Look at camera 6. I switched to the feed from my rear perimeter. A massive crowd of infected stretched across the frame, hundreds of them streaming through the forest. They moved between the trees like a living flood. Their ranks swelling as more arrived from directions I couldn't even see. The radio continued its emergency broadcasts, but the reports were getting shorter, more desperate. Entire cities going dark, military safe zones being overrun, the infection spreading faster than anyone could contain. I'd spent years preparing for social collapse, economic disaster, even foreign invasion. But this was something beyond my worst-case scenarios. The infected didn't want territory or resources. They wanted us, and they'd never stop coming until they got what they were after. The barn shuddered again as more bodies slammed against the walls. The steel was holding, but for how long? And what happened when we ran out of ammunition or food or just plain luck? Outside, the sound of helicopters rumbled overhead. Military birds heading south toward Nashville. But they didn't stop, didn't even slow down. We were on our own. "Jake," I said, checking my watch, "I need you to keep filming everything. Document what's happening, how we're handling it. If we don't make it through this, someone needs to know what we tried." He nodded, raising his camera despite the tremor in his hands. "Still recording, man, still recording." The infected were learning. On the monitors, I watched them probe different sections of the walls, testing for weak points. When one area proved solid, they moved to another. 11:30 a.m. The siege had officially begun. I'd been watching the monitors for 10 minutes when the first wave hit. Not a coordinated assault. These things didn't have that kind of intelligence, but a convergence of hunger drawn by the earlier gunfire. They slammed against the steel walls like a tide of rotting flesh, their collective weight making the entire structure groan. "Jesus Christ," Jared whispered, his camera capturing the feeds. "How many are there?" I counted quickly across the monitors. Couple hundred, maybe more, and they're not stopping. The sound was what got to you, not just the moaning, that inhuman chorus that crawled under your skin, but the wet slapping of decomposing hands against metal, the scraping of fingernails worn down to bone, the random thuds of bodies throwing themselves against barriers with no regard for self-preservation. Through the security feeds, I watched a businessman in a shredded suit repeatedly ram his head against the south wall. Each impact left a dark smear, but he kept going, driven by whatever remained of his nervous system. Beside him, a soccer mom in yoga pants clawed at the steel with fingers that had worn down to bloody stumps. "They don't feel pain," I said more to myself than to Jared. "Look at that." On monitor 3, an infected postal worker had somehow gotten his arm caught between two steel support beams. Instead of trying to free himself, he just kept pushing forward, the trapped limb twisting at impossible angles until something snapped audibly. Dark fluid oozed from the compound fracture, but the thing never even slowed down. 11:45 a.m. The first breach attempt. "Derek, southwest corner." Jared pointed at monitor 7. A group of infected had found the emergency ventilation grate I'd installed near ground level. Not through any tactical thinking. They were simply drawn to the air movement. But their combined weight was starting to bend the protective covering. I grabbed my AR-15 and headed for the southwest firing port, a reinforced gun port I'd built into each wall specifically for this kind of situation. Through the narrow opening, I could see the infected clustered around the vent like maggots on meat. "Cover your ears," I warned Jared. The AR barked in controlled bursts. 3-round groups aimed shots, making every bullet count. The 223 rounds punched through skulls with wet cracks, dropping the infected where they stood. But for everyone I killed, 2 more stumbled over the bodies to take their place. "Ammunition count?" I called out while changing magazines. "You've burned through about 300 rounds so far," Jared replied, checking his notepad where he'd been tracking our consumption. "Good thinking. Battlefield accounting might save our lives." By noon, I'd cleared the vent threat, but new problems were emerging. The infected weren't smart enough to coordinate, but their sheer numbers were creating tactical challenges I hadn't anticipated. They piled against the walls in writhing heaps, some actually climbing over others to reach higher points on the structure. "Monitor 4, Jared said urgently. A mound of infected bodies had grown against the north wall, creating a ramp of flesh and bone. More infected were using it to reach the roof line where my solar panels and communication equipment sat exposed. I switched to the M2, setting it up at the north firing port. The heavy machine gun's range and power made it perfect for this kind of work. The first burst scattered the pile like bowling pins, sending limbs and torsos flying in all directions. The 50 caliber rounds didn't just kill, they obliterated, creating a crater in the infected mass. But they kept coming. Always kept coming. 12:30 p.m. The siege intensified. The infected numbers had grown beyond my ability to count accurately. They surrounded the building in a shifting, moaning ocean that stretched as far as the security cameras could see. Some wandered aimlessly until sounds drew them back to the walls. Others simply stood in place, swaying slightly, their clouded eyes staring at nothing. I'd established a rotation, AR-15 for precision work, M2 for crowd control, switching positions between firing ports to prevent any single area from being overwhelmed. Jared had proven surprisingly useful, spotting threats and keeping ammunition counts while documenting everything on camera. "You're getting good at this," I told him during a brief lull while I cleaned the M2's barrel. "I don't want to get good at this," he replied, but his hands were steady now. "This morning I was worried about camera angles. Now I'm counting zombie corpses." That's when we heard the screaming, human screaming, coming from the east, beyond the tree line. Through binoculars I spotted them, a family of 4 running through the forest, maybe half a mile out, parents carrying small children, fleeing toward my property with a mob of infected in pursuit. The father carried a hunting rifle, stopping periodically to fire wild shots behind them. "We have to help them," Jared said immediately. I watched through the scope, calculating distances and angles. "They'll never make it to the front gate. Too many infected between here and there." "So we do what? Let them die?" The family broke into the clearing near my eastern perimeter fence. The father, tall guy in flannel, probably a local rancher, turned to make a stand while his wife shepherded the kids toward the fence line. He got off 2 shots before the infected overwhelmed him. I made the decision without thinking. "Stay here. Monitor all approaches. If I don't make it back, seal the building and wait for rescue." "Derek, don't..." But I was already moving. I grabbed my tactical vest loaded with magazines, threw open the emergency exit that led to my workshop, and sprinted for the fence line. The Remington 870 shotgun came off its rack, better for close quarters work than a rifle. The infected hadn't noticed me yet, focused as they were on the fresh prey. I vaulted my own fence and advanced through the trees, using cover and concealment techniques burned into muscle memory from my army days. The woman was pressed against my perimeter fence with 2 kids, boy and girl, maybe 8 and 10 years old. Behind them, infected closed in from multiple directions. The father was down but still moving, crawling toward his family, while infected tore chunks from his legs. 40 yards. I opened up with the shotgun. Buckshot at close range turns human heads into pink mist. The first infected went down without a sound. The second spun around, most of its face missing, and stumbled toward me. Another blast removed it from the equation permanently. "This way," I shouted to the family. "Follow the fence to the gate." The woman grabbed her children and ran. I provided covering fire, the shotgun punching through infected torsos and limbs. But they were everywhere, pouring out of the woods like a brown tide. The father was gone. 3 infected crouched over his body, feeding with wet tearing sounds. I put them down with carefully aimed shots, but it was too late for him. Fighting withdrawal. Keep moving, keep shooting, never let them surround you. I retreated toward my property while the woman and kids reached the gate. The electronic lock responded to my keychain remote, and they tumbled through to relative safety. That's when I ran out of shotgun shells. The nearest infected was 20 feet away, a teenage boy whose Letterman jacket was soaked with gore. Behind him, at least a dozen more stumbled through the underbrush. I dropped the empty shotgun and drew my sidearm, a Glock 19 loaded with hollow points. Pistol shooting is different. Smaller targets, less stopping power, higher accuracy requirements. But I'd trained for this scenario countless times. Sight alignment, trigger control, follow through. Each shot had to count. The first infected dropped with a hole through its forehead. The second took 2 rounds center mass before falling. The third. Click. Empty magazine. I was still fumbling for a reload when strong hands grabbed me from behind. Jared had left his position, coming to extract me with an AR-15 in his hands. "Go! I'll cover!" His shooting was methodical, controlled, 3-round bursts that dropped infected with precision. The film school kid had become a soldier in the space of 5 hours. We made it back to the barn with 30 seconds to spare. 15 p.m. The rescued family huddled in our emergency shelter area while I conducted a tactical assessment. Maria Santos, 34, elementary school teacher. Her kids were Tommy, 8, and Elena, 10. Her husband Carlos had been a foreman at the construction company building new cell towers in the area. Good people caught in impossible circumstances. "How long have you been running?" I asked Maria while checking her and the kids for bites. "Since this morning. Carlos was at the tower site when it started. Workers started attacking each other. He came home, told us to pack everything we could carry." Her voice was steady despite the tears. "We've been hiding in the forest since. No bites, no scratches. They were clean." "What's the food situation?" I asked Jared quietly. "We've got enough MREs for maybe 2 weeks with 5 people. Water's good for 3 weeks if we're careful." Tommy Santos tugged on my sleeve. "Mister, are the bad people going to get us?" I knelt down to his level. "Not while I'm here, kid. This place is built like a fortress." But privately, I was running the numbers. More mouths to feed, finite ammunition, and infected numbers that seemed to grow every hour. The rescue had been the right thing to do morally, but tactically it complicated everything. 2 p.m. The infected discovered the root cellar. My property had an old storm cellar from the 1950s, converted into additional storage space. The entrance was hidden under a concrete slab, but the infected were clustering around it now, drawn by air currents or vibrations they could sense but not understand. "They can't be that close to the building," I muttered, studying the monitors. "Why not?" Jared asked. "Because if they breach that cellar, they'll be inside our defensive perimeter." I designed the barn's defenses assuming threats would come from outside the fence line. But the old cellar connected to the main building through a sealed tunnel I'd forgotten about. If the infected broke through— "New plan," I announced. "We seal that tunnel, now." The access hatch was in the barn's basement level, secured with a heavy steel door. "Help me with this," I told Jared, gesturing toward a pile of sandbags I kept for flood protection. We spent the next hour barricading the tunnel entrance. Sandbags, steel plates, even a workbench wedged against the door. It wouldn't stop them indefinitely, but it would buy us time. 3:30 p.m., the first equipment failure. One of my external security cameras went dark, not destroyed, but the cable had been severed by infected clawing at anything they could reach. then another. Within 30 minutes, I'd lost visual coverage of the entire eastern approach. Going blind, I reported to the group. Can't see what's happening out there anymore. That's when the power went out. Not my power. I had backup generators and solar batteries, but the municipal power grid had finally collapsed, taking the cell towers and internet connections with it. We were completely cut off from the outside world. 4 p.m. The infected found the weak point. Every defensive position has one, the place where competing design requirements create vulnerability. Mine was the ventilation system. I'd built the barn to be airtight in case of chemical threats, with filtered air circulation to prevent contamination. But that meant air intakes, and air intakes meant potential entry points. The main intake was on the roof, protected by steel grating and supposedly inaccessible. But infected don't think about accessibility. They just go where instinct drives them. Something's in the vents, Maria said, pointing at the ceiling. Scratching sounds like claws on metal. Getting closer. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the maintenance ladder to the vent access panel. Through the grating, I could see movement in the ductwork. One of the infected had somehow made it onto the roof and was crawling through the intake shaft. "Everyone back!" I shouted, dropping down and grabbing the shotgun. The vent cover exploded outward as something pale and writhing crashed through. A woman in a nurse's uniform, her body contorted by hours of crawling through tight spaces. Both legs were broken, bones protruding through skin, but she kept moving with her arms alone. I ended it with a single shotgun blast, but the vent was compromised now, and more sounds came from the ductwork above. 4:30 p.m., critical decision time. "We can't stay here," I told the group while sealing the damaged vent with steel plates and construction adhesive. "This position is compromised." "Where can we go?" Maria asked, holding her children close. I'd been thinking about this possibility for years. Every prepper has a fallback position. The place you go when your primary defensive location fails. Underground bunker, half a mile north built into a hillside. Better security, independent power, enough supplies for months. "How do we get there without getting killed?" Jared asked. "Good question." The infected surrounded us in numbers that made movement seem impossible. But I had one advantage they couldn't match: superior firepower and tactical thinking. We fight our way out. 5 p.m. The breakout begins. I'd spent the last 30 minutes preparing for the most dangerous gamble of my life. Every weapon system loaded and ready, ammunition distributed, escape route planned down to the last detail. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Create a corridor of destruction through the infected horde using overwhelming firepower, then move fast before they could react. "Maria, you carry the emergency packs. Jared, you take Tommy. I'll carry Elena and provide covering fire. We move as one unit. No one stops for anything." The little girl looked up at me with wide eyes. "Are we going to die?" "Not today, sweetheart. Not on my watch." I activated the barn's emergency systems one final time. Every light in the building blazed to life, drawing infected attention to the main structure. Then I opened the secondary exit that led to my workshop. The M2 machine gun was already positioned to cover our escape route. I'd calculated the angles and distances, marked the firing lanes with strips of reflective tape only I could see in the fading daylight. "When I start shooting, you run for that tree line. Don't look back, don't stop, just run." The first burst from the M2 carved a path through the infected crowd like a chainsaw through cardboard. Bodies exploded in sprays of dark fluid and bone fragments. The heavy rounds punched through multiple targets, creating a corridor of destruction 40 yards long. "Go, go, go!" We ran. Elena clung to my neck while I sprinted through the carnage, my boots splashing through puddles of infected remains. Behind us, Jared carried Tommy while Maria ran alongside, her teacher's instincts keeping her focused on her surviving child. The infected tried to close the gap, but I'd planned for this. Pre-positioned explosive charges detonated behind us, triggered by remote control. The blasts didn't kill many infected, but they created enough chaos and noise to mask our escape. "Keep moving," I shouted over the explosions. We reached the tree line as infected began converging on our position from multiple directions. But we had a head start now, and I knew these woods like my own backyard. 5:45 p.m., the bunker. My fallback position looked like a natural hillside, but hidden behind camouflaged steel doors lay a shelter I'd been building for 3 years. Solar power, filtered air, enough food and ammunition to last months. Holy shit, Jared breathed as the lights came on inside. You built all this? Paranoia pays dividends, I replied, conducting a security check of the perimeter sensors. The bunker was everything the barn had been, but better. Hardened against everything from nuclear fallout to zombie apocalypse. Steel-reinforced concrete walls, multiple escape routes, independent life support systems. 6:30 p.m., holding the high ground. From the bunker's observation post, I could see my barn in the distance. Infected swarmed over it like ants on a discarded sandwich, but the structure was holding. They'd get inside eventually, but there was nothing left there worth protecting. Movement southwest ridge, Jared called out, manning one of the observation scopes. A new group of infected was ascending the hill toward our position, maybe 30 of them, including several that must have been military personnel based on their tattered uniforms. They moved mindless as all the others, but their equipment made them potentially more dangerous. Can they find us? Maria asked. Not unless we give them a reason to look, I replied, checking the bunker's camouflaged vents and antenna arrays. But one of the military infected was carrying something that made my blood run cold. A functioning emergency radio with its speaker crackling loudly. Static and garbled voices blared from the device. The volume turned up high enough to hear from hundreds of yards away. Shit. That radio's broadcasting loud enough to wake the dead, I muttered. I couldn't let it continue making that noise. The constant static and intermittent voice transmissions would draw infected from miles around, eventually overwhelming even our improved position. 7:00 p.m., final engagement. I have to go out there, I told the group while loading my rifle with armor-piercing rounds. You're insane, Jared replied. There's 30 of them. There'll be 300 if I let that radio keep broadcasting static and voices. I'd done the math. In fortified positions with adequate ammunition, one trained shooter could engage multiple targets effectively. But this required precision shooting at extended range, the kind of work that separated professionals from amateurs. The bunker's concealed fighting position gave me excellent fields of fire, while keeping me hidden from the approaching infected. Through my rifle scope, I could see them clearly. Military infected interspersed with civilians, all drawn by whatever signals their damaged brains still processed. First shot. The infected carrying the radio dropped instantly, the .308 round punching through its skull and destroying the noisy device in a shower of sparks and plastic fragments. But the others kept coming, drawn now by the gunshot. Controlled pairs, aimed fire. Each shot had to count because missing meant wasting ammunition we might need later. The infected fell one by one, their bodies tumbling down the hillside in grotesque tangles. The last one was a problem. A soldier whose body armor had deflected my first shot. It kept advancing even with a bullet hole through its shoulder, driven by whatever remained of its nervous system. I switched to semi-automatic and put 3 rounds center mass. The armor-piercing bullets punched through the Kevlar like tissue paper, dropping the infected soldier 10 yards from my position. 7:15 p.m. Silence. For the first time in nearly 12 hours, no immediate threats appeared on our sensors. The infected horde remained at the barn, but they seemed to have lost our trail. The radio was destroyed, eliminating the loud audio that had been drawing them. Is it over? Tommy asked quietly. I looked out at the burning landscape, at the distant glow of fires consuming what had been civilization that morning. This part is, but it's going to be a long time before anything's really over. Maria pulled her children close. What happens now? Now we survive. We figure out how to live in a world where the dead don't stay dead. I secured my rifle and sealed the observation post. We've got supplies for months, defensible positions, and we know how to fight them. That's more than most people have tonight. Jared was still filming, documenting everything with the dedication of someone who understood that this record might be all that remained of our civilization. You saved us, Maria said simply. We saved each other, I corrected. And we're going to keep doing it one day at a time. Outside, the infected continued their mindless wandering, driven by instincts they no longer understood. But inside our bunker, 5 human beings sat together in the warm light, planning for tomorrow. The world had ended while we were recording a gun review, but we'd survived the first day, and that had to count for something. As darkness settled over the Tennessee hills, I checked our supplies. 3 months of MREs, 8,000 rounds of ammunition, and a bunker built to last. The numbers looked good, but numbers didn't tell the whole story. Derek, Maria called softly. Tommy's asking about his father again. The boy's eyes held that particular emptiness that comes with loss too big to understand. Elena sat protectively beside him, already taking on responsibilities no 10-year-old should carry. Tell him his dad was brave, I said finally. Tell him Carlos bought you time to escape, and that's what heroes do. Jared monitored radio frequencies, scanning for organized resistance. Most channels carried static or automated distress signals, but human voices occasionally broke through. Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, holding the courthouse but low on ammunition. Military convoy overrun at Highway 40. CDC facility in Atlanta has gone dark. Each transmission painted the same picture: isolated survivors surrounded by infected. The collapse had happened in hours, not days. Anything useful? I asked. Some chatter about safe zones in Kentucky and Virginia, but most sounds like false hope. People gathering in schools and malls, death traps with too many entry points. Military channels were mostly dead air. Either they'd gone encrypted or there weren't enough units left to communicate. Through the bunker's periscope, I monitored my abandoned barn. Infected still wandered the property, but their numbers had thinned. One former businesswoman had been standing motionless near my workshop for over an hour, swaying like a tree in the wind. They don't sleep, I observed. Look at the monitors. Look at 12 hours without rest, no fatigue, no recovery time needed. It was sobering. Human defenders needed sleep and food. The infected required none of those things. A decisive biological advantage in any prolonged siege. Maria emerged from the sleeping quarters, moving quietly to avoid waking her children. They're finally asleep. First time since... She stopped, unable to finish. Since this morning, I completed gently. It's been a long day for all of us. She nodded, accepting the cup of coffee I offered from my emergency supplies. Real coffee, not the instant stuff. Small comforts mattered more when the world ended. What happens tomorrow? She asked. We assess our situation, monitor radio traffic, make contact with other survivors if possible. Beyond that, I shrugged. We adapt, we survive. We figure out how to live in whatever's left of the world. Do you think there's anything left? I mean, really left? I considered the question while watching the monitors. In the distance, the glow of fires painted the horizon orange. Nashville was burning, or at least parts of it were. But fires burn out eventually, and humans are remarkably good at surviving impossible situations. There's always something left, I said finally. Might not look like what we had before, but humans are tough. We'll rebuild somehow. How can you be so sure? Because we're here. Because we fought back instead of giving up. Because that little boy in there deserves a future, even if it's different from the one we planned. Jared had moved to another radio, trying to establish contact with potential survivor groups. His film school background hadn't prepared him for tactical communications, but he was learning fast. Crisis has a way of accelerating education. Got something, he announced suddenly. Group holed up in a farm about 30 miles north. They're asking for assistance with wounded. I moved to the radio, taking the microphone. This is Derek, what's your situation? Derek, thank God. This is Bill Patterson, we met at the gun show last year. We're at my farm with maybe 15 people, but we've got infected testing our perimeter and 3 people with bite wounds. We don't know what to do. I remembered Bill, good man. Former Marine, solid head on his shoulders. If he was asking for help, the situation was serious. Bill, listen carefully. Anyone who's been bitten needs to be isolated immediately. Full quarantine, separate from your main group. How long since the bites occurred? 2 hours, maybe 3. They're starting to show symptoms: fever, delirium, aggressive behavior. Then you're almost out of time. You know what needs to be done. Silence on the radio. We all knew what needed to be done, but knowing and doing were different things entirely. I can't, Derek. One of them is my daughter. The weight of those words settled over our bunker like a physical presence. Bill Patterson faced the same impossible choice countless other survivors were confronting: preserve your humanity or preserve your life. Bill, if you don't act now, you'll lose everyone. Your daughter is already gone. What's left isn't her anymore. I know that, God help me, I know that, but she's still your little girl. I understand. But Bill, you've got 14 other people depending on you to make the hard choice. Maria turned away, unable to listen. The conversation hit too close to home. She'd almost lost her own children today, and only quick action had saved them. After several minutes of difficult discussion, Bill agreed to do what needed to be done. I walked him through the process, providing tactical advice for handling the newly infected while protecting his remaining survivors. It was brutal, necessary, and heartbreaking. When the radio conversation ended, our bunker felt heavier somehow. We'd just saved 14 lives by convincing a father to kill his infected daughter. That kind of calculus doesn't exist in normal times. This is what the world is now, I said to the group. Impossible choices, no good options, survival measured in hours instead of years. But even as I spoke those words, I saw something else in the bunker. Tommy sleeping peacefully despite the trauma. Elena keeping watch over her younger brother. Maria maintaining her strength for her children's sake. Jared transforming from civilian to defender. Humanity adapting. Humanity enduring. Humanity refusing to surrender. The infected owned the ruins of the old world. But in hidden places like this bunker, the seeds of the new world were already growing. I pulled out my radio and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies, not asking for rescue, but offering it. This is Derek Orloff, broadcasting from secure location in central Tennessee. If anyone can hear this, we have a defensible position, supplies, and the means to help survivors. Stay alive out there. Keep fighting. The dead may have won today, but they haven't won forever. Because that's what you do when the world ends. You survive. You protect the people you can. And you never, ever give up. The cameras captured everything. When civilization rebuilds, they'll know what happened here. They'll know that some of us fought back and we won.